Good afternoon, my name is Ola, and I want to thank everybody who joins us here in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. It's day 425 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and now we will be talking about the situation in Kherson region. Joining us online is Oleksandr Prokudin, the military governor of Kherson region. Good afternoon, Mr. Oleksandr. Good afternoon, Mr. Oleksandr. We know that within the last day, the Russians shelled Kherson and Kherson region. Again, what is the aftermath of the shell and what is the situation in the region in general? Yesterday, the Russian invaders targeted the territories of the liberated Kherson region 83 times using different types of weapons. They launched 14 and 12 projectiles in total. There were 13 projectiles launched on Kherson, and unfortunately we have casualties among the civil population. 2 people died as a result of Russian invasion and 6 more were injured. Yesterday the Russians killed an 80-year-old Kherson denizen when they attacked Kherson with the mortars. Another victim was a 72-year-old man who ended up under shelling in a forest near the village of Velitensky, heavily injured. He was hospitalized, however the medics did not make it, saving his life. His wounds were lethal. Last day, the army of Russian Federation was intensely shelling the village of Kozylets of Beloguria community. A vehicle of the law enforcement of the police was damaged, plus the facility of the school. 2 women aged 85 and 64 years were hospitalized after injuries. They were transported to the medical facility in Kherson. Generally, there were 6,093 civilian installations damaged as a result of Russian shellings, 203 schools and other educational institutions, plus 53 medical facilities. Those were the structures that were damaged as a result of Russian shelling since liberation. Well, what is humanitarian situation in the region? The humanitarian situation is still complicated. Thanks to the efforts of our partners, volunteers and military administration, people have all their basic needs covered. We keep supplying the meals and hygienic products, so the situation is more or less okay, however still complicated. Well, talking about the temporarily occupied territory, what's going on there? What about the operation of our resistance movement over there? The kidnappings, maraudery, illegal imprisonment of the civilians, torturings, murders, this is a horrific reality of for the civilians who remain in the temporarily occupied territories. That our citizens end up in the cellars just because the Russians, they feel their impunity and they continue their atrocities, but their image, this image is false. No one will evade the punishment. We know that the Russians intensify their work on forced passportization of the citizens of Kherson region in the left bank, and which is another war crime. Since May, the Russians plan not to let the people without Russian passports through the checkposts, and they will refuse the provision of medical services in the hospitals. Well, talking about the dynamics of the presence of Russian troops in temporarily occupied territories of Kherson region, do you observe the increase of their presence there? Well, it's a military issue, but my personal opinion is that the number of personnel remains unchanged. Some of the units are being rotated, but the total number of the Russian military remains the same in those territories. We have questions on the floor. Good afternoon, Irina Mamchur, Ukraine Forum. I have a couple of questions, if I may. The first one, can you give us the percentage or the absolute numbers? What is the territory of the agricultural lands that were inspected for mine contamination? What is the situation with the sowing campaign in Kherson region? What's going on? Thank you. Well, look, as to the percentage, it's only 10% of the territory which is demined currently. I'm talking about humanitarian demine, and here 32,000 hectares for today. Some farmers, they started the sowing campaign, but it's the minor fraction of the deoccupied territory of Kherson region. So 32,000 hectares are demined, and they can be sown now. So it includes both agricultural lands and other lands. Yes, correct. Okay, so the next question, can you please tell us, do you know the exact number of children who still stay in the deoccupied territories of Kherson region? It's 15,000 kids. Thank you. And another question, is the regional government preparing any program for recovery of Kherson region? And if so, does it in any way have the involvement of the civil community, of the public? Well, look, the program exists, and everybody is aware of the plan. The works are underway on reestablishing the communications, recovery of the critical infrastructure. The specialists keep working to provide the uninterrupted power and water supply to the homes of the inhabitants of Kherson and Kherson region, and thanks to the central government and the governments of other regions, 154 settlements out of 220 are already reconnected to the power supply, and it was 0 since the first day of the occupation, and 189,000 consumers were reconnected to the power grid. It's 85% of the total number of consumers. 92% were reconnected to the gas supply, and 174 settlements were reconnected to the water supply out of 228. Thank you. And the last question, we're trying here to keep the silence, but maybe you have any information about the counteroffensive or forces in Kherson region. I would be happy to communicate such information if it were my competence. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining our broadcast. I'm reminding you, joining us was Oleksandr Prokudin, the military governor of Kherson region, and our next briefing is at 1400. We will be talking about the situation in Dnipropetrovsk region, so bear with us. Trust in our armed forces, and glory to Ukraine.